Chapter 2, Early Hardships. One of the earliest recollections of my adventurous childhood is the ride I had on a pony's side. I was passive in the whole matter. A little girl cousin of mine was put in a bag and suspended from the horn of an Indian saddle. But her weight must be balanced or the saddle would not remain on the animal's back. Accordingly, I was put into another sack and made to keep the saddle and the girl in position. I did not object, for I had a very pleasant game of peekaboo with the girl until we came to a big snow drift where the poor beast was stuck fast and began to lay down. Then it was not so nice. This was a convenient and primitive way in which some mothers packed their children for winter journeys. However, the cold the weather might be, the inmate of the fur-lined sack was usually very comfortable. At least I used to think so. I believe I was accustomed to all the precarious Indian conveyances, and as a boy, I enjoyed the dog travaux ride as much as any. The travaux consisted of a set of rawhide strips securely lashed to the tent poles, which were harnessed to the sides of the animal as if he stood between shafts, while the free ends were allowed to drag on the ground. Both ponies and large dogs were used as beasts of burden, and they carried in this way the smaller children as well as the baggage. This mode of traveling for children was possible only in the summer, and as the dogs were sometimes unreliable, the little ones were exposed to a certain amount of danger. For instance, whenever a train of dogs had been traveling for a long time, almost perishing with the heat and their heavy loads, a glimpse of water would cause them to forget all their responsibilities. Some of them, in spite of the screams of the women, would swim with their burdens into the cooling stream, and I was thus, on more than one occasion, made to partake of an unwilling bath. I was a little over 4 years old at the time of the Sioux massacre in Minnesota. In the general turmoil, we took flight into British Columbia, and the journey is still vividly remembered by all our family. A yoke of oxen and a lumber wagon were taken from some white farmer and brought home for our conveyance. How delighted I was when I learned that we were to ride behind those wise-looking animals, and in that gorgeously painted wagon, it was almost like a living creature to me. This new vehicle with 4 legs, and the more so when we got out of axle grease and the wheels went along squealing like pigs. The boys found a great deal of innocent fun in jumping from the high wagon while the oxen were leisurely moving along. My elder brothers soon became experts. At last, I mustered up courage enough to join them in this sport. I was sure they stepped on the wheel, so I cautiously placed my moccasin foot upon it. Alas, before I could realize what had happened, I was under the wheels, and had it not been for the neighbor immediately behind us, I might have been run over by the next team as well. This was my first experience with the civilized vehicle. I cried out all possible reproaches on the white man's team and concluded that a dog travaux was good enough for me. I was really rejoiced that we were moving away from the people who made the wagon that had almost ended my life, and it did not occur to me that I alone was to blame. I could not be persuaded to ride in that wagon again, and was glad when we finally left it beside the Missouri River. The summer after the Minnesota massacre, General Sibley pursued our people across the river. Now the Missouri is considered one of the most treacherous rivers in the world. Even a good modern boat is not safe upon its uncertain current. We were forced to cross in buffalo skin boats as round as tubs. The Washachu, white men, were coming in great numbers with their big guns. And while most of our men were fighting them to gain time, the women and the old men made and equipped the temporary boats, braced with ribs of willow. Some of these were towed by 2 or 3 women or men and swimming in the water, and some by ponies. It was not an easy matter to keep them right side up with their helpless freight of little children and such goods as we possessed. In our flight, we little folks were strapped in the saddles or held in front of an older person, and in the long night marches to get away from the soldiers, we suffered from loss of sleep and insufficient food. Our meals were eaten hastily and sometimes in the saddle. Water was not always to be found. The people carried it with them in bags formed of tripe or the dried pericardium of animals. Now we were compelled to trespass upon the country of hostile tribes and were harassed by them almost daily and nightly. Only the strictest vigilance saved us. One day we met with another enemy near the British lines. It was a prairie fire. We were surrounded. Another fire was quickly made, which saved our lives. One of the most thrilling experiences of the following winter was a blizzard, which overtook us in our wanderings. Here and there, a family lay down in the snow, selecting a place where it was not likely to drift much. For a day and a night, we lay under the snow. Uncle stuck a long pole beside us to tell us when the storm was over. We had plenty of buffalo ropes, and the snow kept us warm, but we found it heavy. After a time, it became right side up with their helpless freight of little children and such goods as we, I just read that. Okay, hold on. We had plenty of buffalo robes and the snow kept us warm, but we found it heavy. After a time, it became packed and hollowed out around our bodies so that we were as comfortable as one can be under those circumstances. The next day, the storm ceased, and we discovered a large herd of buffaloes almost upon us. We dug our way out, shot some of the buffaloes, made a fire, and enjoyed a good dinner. I was now an exile as well as motherless, yet I was not unhappy. Our wanderings from place to place afforded us many pleasant experiences and quite as many hardships and misfortunes. There were times of plenty and times of scarcity, and we had several narrow escapes from death. In savage life, the early spring is the most trying time, and almost all the famines occurred at this period of the year. The Indians are a patient and clannish people. Their love for one another is stronger than that of any civilized people I know. If this were not so, I believe there would have been tribes of cannibals among them. White people have been known to kill and eat their companions in preference to starving, but Indians, never. In times of famine, the adults often deny themselves in order to make the food last as long as possible for the children, who were not able to bear hunger as well as the old. As a people, they can live without food much longer than any other nation. I once passed through one of these hard springs when we had nothing to eat for several days. I well remember the 6 small birds which constituted the breakfast for 6 families one morning, and then we had no dinner or supper to follow. What a relief that was to me, although I had only a small wing of a small bird for my share. Soon after this, we came into a region where buffaloes were plenty and hunger and scarcity were forgotten. Such was the Indians' wild life. When game was to be had and the sun shone, They easily forgot the bitter experiences of the winter before. Little preparation was made for the future. They are children of nature, and occasionally she whips them with the lashes of experience. Yet they are forgetful and careless. Much of their suffering might have been prevented by a little calculation. During the summer, when nature is at her best and provides abundantly for the savage, it seems to me that no life is happier than his. Food is free, lodging free, everything free. All were alike rich in the summer, and again, all were alike poor in the winter and early spring. However, their diseases were fewer and not so destructive as now, and the Indian's health was generally good. The Indian boy enjoyed such a life as almost all boys dream of and would choose for themselves if they were permitted to do so. The raids made upon our people by other tribes were frequent, and we had to be constantly on the watch. I remember at one time a night attack was made upon our camp, and all our ponies stampeded. Only a few of them were recovered, and our journeys after this misfortune were affected mostly by means of the dog travaux. The second winter after the massacre, my father and my 2 older brothers, with several others, were betrayed by a half-breed at Winnipeg to the United States authorities. As I was then living with my uncle in another part of the country, I became separated from them for 10 years. During all this time, we believed that they had been killed by the whites, and I was taught that I must avenge their deaths as soon as I was able to go upon the warpath. That's the end of chapter 2. Thank you for listening.